Welcome to the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is Thursday, May 8th, 2025. This is our 247th episode. My name is Sansara Taylor, and I'm joined, as I have been often lately, by Annie Day.
Very glad to be here, Sansara, and welcome to everyone tuning in. This is a show that refuses to make peace with any aspect of the horrors of this system of capitalism imperialism. We are about and working to bring into being nothing less than an actual revolution, based on the new communism that's been developed by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. The new communism represents a framework for human emancipation for real. And we're going to talk more about the content of this new communism, and you're going to hear directly from Bob Avakian throughout today's show.
That's right. Today we have two big themes in our episode. The first is a mission that every decent person in this country needs to be on together with us, and that is to raise the demand the Trump fascist regime must go now. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America and be part of the fight that's being led by Refusefascism.org to bring forth millions of people in mass protest and struggle in a sustained way until we win that demand and the Trump fascist regime really is out of power. And we'll be talking about that some. And the second big mission that we are on, which is that we need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system. And this gets to what Annie was talking about, an actual revolution. And we're going to get into what that means and why everybody who hungers for a whole different way to live, a whole different way the world could be set up and function for all of humanity needs to be about revolution and getting seriously into the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, and getting with the REVCOM core for the emancipation of humanity.
You just said very passionately that the Trump fascist regime must go now. Can you tell us some at the top of the show, before we get into the meat of our show, what people can do to help make that real?
Well, we're going to hear from Andy Z from a recent webinar that Refuse Fascism held just a couple nights ago. But one of the big things that's being put forward right now by Refuse Fascism is two major days of action. May 15th, which is the occasion of the Supreme Court taking a case on birthright citizenship, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But this is a massive assault on the rule of law, on constitutional rights, on immigrants. And really, it concentrates a great deal about the future. So there are protests in D.C. that morning in front of the Supreme Court and nationwide being called by Refusefascism.org. And then May 17th, which is a national day of action to get the demand, the Trump fascist regime must go now, out everywhere, in mass protests in the major cities, in banner drops, in silent vigils, in sticker days, all over the country in different ways. But to get this demand in front of millions who are being shocked and horrified, who are being jolted and offended and terrified by all the different just juggernaut of fascist assault from Trump MAGA and their whole nightmare that they're imposing, to get out there and give direction to those who are looking for a way to fight this and to divert this future.
Yeah. So if people want to get organized with that, go to refusefascism.org. So let's get into this question of birthright citizenship and this hearing on May 15th, the leap that it represents and what's involved legally.
We talked a little bit about this last week, and we really have to stay on this. On Trump's first day in office, very first day, he signed 26 executive orders. I mean, all of them were fascist atrocities and crimes against people and their rights in different ways. But there's one of them that Bob Avakian really highlighted and pulled out in a recent social media message for very good reason, and that is Trump's executive order attempting to just overturn and eradicate what's called birthright citizenship, which really is a right, a fundamental right that is built into the Constitution. It's not a law, it's not a policy, it's part of the Constitution going back to the immediate wake of the Civil War, which basically said that anybody who is born in this country is a citizen of this country. And it was directly up against the Dred Scott decision, which had said that if you're born a slave, you're a slave, you have no rights, all of this. This was after the Civil War, reversing that. And it has been the law of the land and the Constitution ever since that time. If you're born in this country, you're a U.S. citizen. And as Bob Avakian pointed out, and this is part of why he highlighted it, if Trump wanted to overturn that, which would be a reactionary thing to do, a backward, xenophobic assault on immigrants and all of this, there are constitutional mechanisms for amending the Constitution, but that's not what Trump did. He is trying to overturn this, which is an assault on immigrants, but also he's trying to do it in a way that is an assault on the Constitution through blatantly unconstitutional means.
So let's play what Bob Avakian said about that, and we'll talk more about this.
If Trump wanted to legally and constitutionally change this, which itself would be a very bad reactionary move, he could try to do so by following the procedures for amending the Constitution that are set forth in the Constitution itself. But that is just the point. Trump does not recognize any limits to his fascist dictatorship, not the Constitution, and not the laws or the rule of law and due process of law. After illegally rounding up legal immigrants who have been convicted of no crime, denying them due process, and sending them to a torture chamber prison in El Salvador, Trump has openly threatened to do the same with citizens of this country. If this Trump regime is allowed to remain in power, no one will be safe from its fascist rule. Whoever Trump decides is an enemy will be targeted with no protection from the law. Black people and other people of color, immigrants, women, LGBT people, and others Trump regards as inferior and unworthy will be subjected to discrimination, oppression, persecution, brutality, and murder without even the pretense of equality under the law or equality and rights in any sense.
People should go listen to that social media message from Bob Avakian in full and really think about the weight of what we just heard and how quickly the Trump fascist regime is moving in that direction. Just recently in an interview, the interviewer asked Trump about, well, aren't you supposed to abide by due process in the Constitution? Watch what the question is and watch his answer.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
And then the same thing happened with Kristi Noem.
Right.
They asked her as well. This is not like a Trump misspeak. This is now their blatant message.
The administration has the authority to.
Ma'am, I'm looking for a yes or no question. Yes or no. Do you believe the Constitution? Yes, ma'am. Do you?
We have
ma'am,
not conducted
we're
in
claiming
any
my
kind
time,
of
Mr. Chairman.
Time is yours.
Okay. Secretary Noem, I'm just looking for a yes or no here. Do you believe the Constitution guarantees due process to everyone in America?
Due process is exactly what this Congress lays out.
Yes or no?
It is,
Okay, ma'am, I'll take that as a no.
The seriousness with which people have to take this. This is not just Trump or Kristi Noem being reactionary, bullies. These are the people at the highest halls of power, aiming to do exactly what Bob Avakian said, act like there's no rule of law for which Trump is forced to abide. And actually, if you think about, also what Bob Avakian says about how Trump is aiming to just mass deport immigrants with no due process. Oh, they're a terrorist. They're
or U.S. citizens.
Or U.S. citizens. Already Trump, and which they've promised, Trump is already making deals with Libya, with countries all over Africa, including Rwanda, to mass deport immigrants. And, the prison in Libya is a hellhole, from which migrants have been stowed away, and which are never heard from again. This is where things are heading very quickly if this regime is not removed from power through mass sustained protest, interacting with the institutions being split apart.
May 15th, I want to come back to this. This is the Supreme Court hearing on a case having to do with birthright citizenship, which is where we started. This is, as soon as Trump issued this executive order, several federal judges blocked it. They said, this is blatantly unconstitutional. You couldn't get more unconstitutional than this. So they blocked it. And that's what happens. The courts are supposed to be, even in their own telling, a check on an overreach from the executive branch or any other branch of government.
Because as written into the Constitution, they are co-equal branches of government.
So this was blocked. And what's happening on the 15th is Trump and his people are trying to say that this federal injunction on him ripping up the birthright citizenship should only apply in those districts where those judges are and should not be blocked nationwide, which is not only would mean that this assault on birthright citizenship would go into effect in most of the country and it would deprive people of their fundamental rights. It would also be a huge assault on the power of the federal courts because they are actually supposed to have the ability to block unconstitutional laws nationwide. So this is a massive escalation. It's very high stakes. It's outrageous. The Supreme Court is giving this a hearing. And it's very important that people be in D.C., raising a demand to defend birthright citizenship, but also raising the demand. This fascist regime has got to go now, and rallying people across the country to raise this. And honestly, almost nobody is tracking this right now. Almost nobody's paying attention to it right now. And I understand on one level because there are so many assaults. And the immigrant community is under such terror, and lawyers and courts and judges are under such assault in so many ways. But this is a very major concentration and leap towards fascism that people need to pay attention to and be out in the streets resisting.
Yeah, and linking it to the whole fascist program. And I just want to underscore one other aspect of this, which really does have to do with the question of whether or not immigrants are human beings and are deserving of any rights and any due process. But even just, you just think about the level of inhumanity and viciousness that's being visited on millions of people who are just, forced to come to the U.S. for the basic ability to survive. And, I just have to say a by the way here that's making me crazy is Trump acts like, and all his fascist minions act like, oh, it's such a big problem that all these immigrants are here. Well, sorry, it's a problem for you and your system and your fascist agenda, but it's actually a very good thing for humanity. So it's also why we have to say, todos somos ilegales.
Yeah, that's right. We are all illegal. So May 15th protest, but then May 17th, which is a Saturday. This is the next big day of protest, or it needs to be, and we need to fight and make it so. RefuseFascism.org has called this. I think protests are now planned in 6 or 7 cities across the country, but this needs to be taken up very, very broadly. And there really are millions and millions of people who are agonizing. We need to reach them. We need to rally them to be in the streets with us on this day and to raise this demand. The Trump fascist regime must go now. And one of the things that we emphasized last week, one of the things that was wrestled with in the Refuse Fascism regional assemblies recently is that we don't have to organize millions to drive this regime out. We need to get this demand in front of millions. Trump is going to jolt them. Trump is going to move them, and he is moving millions. We need them to see this demand, and we need growing numbers of people who understand the strategy for how those millions could be led in a sustained movement of mass protest and resistance, nonviolent but fierce and determined in every quarter of society on such a level, growing to such impact that we create the kind of profound political crisis where Trump cannot govern this country, cannot impose his fascist program, and cannot hold on to the reins of power. This is the mission, and the 17th needs to be a major leap towards this. So we want to start the show with this. We want to really drive this home and involve all of you in making this a big leap forward. But we also want to share, we know that a big question has come up almost everywhere that we have taken this mission out, and Refuse Fascism has taken it out. And that is people saying, but how are millions of people in the streets really going to create the conditions where Trump would be removed? Could that really happen? How could that happen? And on a webinar earlier this week, Andy Z, who is one of the leaders of Refuse Fascism, he's also a host of this show with us, he spoke to this, and we want to share it with you.
A question that's come up is, how could we actually defeat them? Should we move to that now? to answer that question is to say that you have to go back to what it is we're facing, which is fascism. And fascism is a different form of rule. And now, how does that come about? Well, the people who've run this country, into two ruling parties, they go back and forth, and who's in power, different years, who wins the presidency, who has the most state houses, who has the control of Congress, and all this kind of stuff. There's been a basic consensus as to how the country should be ruled for 200 and plus years. Well, actually not quite, because there was a civil war that was the last time that consensus broke, and it came down to a war. But in recent years, a fascist movement has arisen of a section of very powerful people, backed by very powerful people in the ruling class. They made that clear, and with the tech bros, but also not just them, conservative think tanks, that has a different way the country should be ruled. No more of this multiculturalism, multilateral stuff. No more. Things have gone too far for this section of the ruling class in terms of giving rights to Black people, all people of color, to women, they don't even want to acknowledge LGBTQ people, in part because the roots of the soul of this movement, actually, and I say that ironically, is a Christian fascist movement. Now, the thing is, they have a different way of ruling this system, and they are part of a fascist government, and part of what you can see them doing is they need to actually destroy or neuter, which would be more preferred. And neuter means that they make ineffective their opposition in the ruling class. You see, the Democratic Party. And this is why you keep hearing them call the Democrats, all kinds of vile names, saying we should lock them up, take away the security clearances, even on former members of Trump's regime. So what does all this mean? It means that there's divisions at the top of society, that if there's millions of people in the streets refusing to allow business to go on as usual, if every institution in society, from hospitals to law firms to colleges to the core institutions of the state, lawyers, judges, they're all splitting. Some are fascists, some aren't. You get to a situation where things could potentially change. Here's an example from recent history. During the Black Lives Matter movement, Trump was incensed by all of this, and his main part of his regime was incensed by it. He was asking, can we shoot protesters in the knees? And then he decided to pull a stunt. They put him down in his bunker when people were protesting on right across from Lafayette Park, right across from the White House. And he was down there, and he realized that he looked weak. So he demanded all his generals, people in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, come march with him in his fatigues across Lafayette Park. And then Trump held up a Bible. He held it up upside down. People know the story I'm talking about. But here's what's important about that story. Mark Milley, who was head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this is not a good guy, okay? This is somebody who was part of carrying out horrific crimes in the Mideast in behalf of U.S. imperialism. Mark Milley did this and felt he'd crossed a line, that it violated the norms of the military and the cohesion of the American military. And then he apologized to the American people. That itself is unprecedented. And in fact, it was true that among the National Guard who were there was tremendous upset among the Black members of that National Guard unit who was assigned and could potentially be used to attack the protesters. So what do we draw from this? What does it have to do with refuse fascism, say, only mass struggle can actually change things? What it has to do with that is that if we are out there in a way, and I say we, I don't just mean refuse fascism, but if refuse fascism is leading the millions who are going to come into the streets for many different reasons, all in opposition to the Trump regime, you could have a situation where at that point, in relationship to other things that might be happening internationally, in the climate, different kinds of things, the economy, that there are sections of the ruling class who begin to break with this. So a lot of times I've had a few discussions this week. They say, well, you're talking about impeachment, you're talking about resignation, are you talking about the 25th Amendment? And the only answer I can give to that is I don't know by what means he'll be removed from power. What I do know, and what has to be bedrock in all this, is that if we build and masses and masses of people in their millions in the streets who will be jolted into action because of what Trump does and what the regime does. And if they are led to have this demand, Trump must go now. We refuse to accept a fascist America. You could see increasing splits in every institution. You know, maybe this time they'll call out a National Guard and the National Guard unit say, we're not going. Okay, they call out different institutions. The judges say, we're not ruling on this bullshit anymore. Fuck you, we're not doing it. You see, things can actually change, and because there's the dynamism that comes up at the top of society that right now the Democrats will not fight this the way it needs to be fought because they are more concerned with maintaining the normal way this system has functioned, which Trump is ignoring and shredding. And I give the one example there, Chuck Schumer, who would, but the whole party. So we need to see here how we could act, that if we act now, get this demand in front of millions of people, mobilize. You're going to get into this in a little while, Sam. I want you to talk about this, about the 17th, where we're going to be protesting to get this demand in front of millions of people. If this happens now, and all of you on this call and those who came to the assemblies, get really clear on why these demands are so essential and why mass mobilization, day after day, night after night, learning from how it's been done in some other countries with all the differences between South Korea and Egypt and here, but nonetheless, where you've got that kind of situation in the streets where this country becomes ungovernable to a certain sense, and he can't implement his program, then things can happen at the top of society and different levels where he actually is removed from power, and this fascist regime is driven into serious retreat and is defeated decisively, at least for a significant amount of time. So I wanted to get into some of this because it's been a question that has come up in almost every Refuse Fascism chapter, and when we're out there in the world, people are conditioned to think it's only elections or only impeachment, and not seeing the power that actually resides in the people when they actually say, in an uncompromising way, "Come, we're fighting for this. Come after us, and more are going to come back." That's the secret to all of this. That's how the civil rights movement, frankly, was fought. That's how they came at people in that generation, and people came back stronger each time, to the point where at a certain point the government said we got to, in combination with other things going on in the world, they said, okay, we got to cut our losses and get out of Vietnam, and before that, Johnson signed a civil rights bill. So those are some of the things I wanted to bring out about how we could actually do this and why we could actually win.
So I think that really brings alive what is possible and how it could become possible to make this demand real. And now we want to go to another segment from Andy from that same webinar where he talked about what people need to be doing now. And I just want to say, for those of you who watch this show or sometimes watch this show, or for whom it's the first time watching this show, now is the time to ask yourself, what does it mean to live a life worthy of your time and your humanity in a time of fascism? What is meaningful to do with your hours and your days? Andy answers this.
We need to have a vision that we have this thing on the 15th. Then on the 17th, our objective, it's on that day, is to make the demand the Trump fascist regime must go, or the shorter version, Trump must go now. And also the Trump fascist regime must go now. Both times it's now is very important, as well as the other slogan. That's what we're getting in front of people. That's part of the strategy to be able to get where we need to go. So that we go into that with hundreds of people wanting to make that a really big deal. And we come out of it with thousands understanding that. But for that to happen, we're doing this on a Saturday because at this point, that's when a lot of people can come out and protest. But in the days leading into it, in addition to the 15th, some of the things that Sam was just talking about need to happen. Like, what if in a city like Los Angeles, there were banner drops on the 10, the 110, and the 101, which are highways that surround the city. And there's even more highways. If you like highways, go to LA. There's a lot of highways. But this is perfect for banner drops. So that going into the day, what if you had a banner day, a sticker day in a high school, and people all the kids put stickers on their packs and then walked out and had a noontime rally about this. And then they came on the weekend, and then next week they did more things. And coming off of these conferences, we should get these demands everywhere. Now you're into the end of May, going into the weekend of Memorial Day, and you're only 2 weeks out from the 14th. But now this demand is circulating among many, many more people. This is part of a strategic approach to organizing the forces, clear on that we're facing fascism, and the objective is to drive out the regime and to refuse to accept the fascist America. Then you're going into the 14th with more strength. Now we need even a longer strategic view. Even as we don't know how fast this is going to move. We know it's moving pretty fast. So we have to develop a plan for this summer. Right now, if you are a student in college or a student in high school, or if you're somebody who's retired, what are you going to do this summer? If you want to make a difference this summer so that there's more summers for humanity to enjoy, you need to devote it to refuse fascism so that you can be part of joining with the masses of protests from 5501, Indivisible, but you're going into it with the understanding and the analysis that is concentrated in refusefascism.org and in these two slogans. So we're going to be working on that. So I agree with Sam when she said that your ideas need to get into the mix. There need to be a lot of discussions in these chapters. Please do not be afraid of controversy in your chapters. We have to break the fucking mold that's been plaguing movements in this country, where as soon as somebody disagrees with somebody else, they're feeling disrespected and the people are getting canceled. And disagreement is good if it's carried out in a principled way to get to what's true, what's the truth is, and what needs to be done. And this is a hard thing we're doing. And the more wrangling there is with the way forward and what we're facing, the better off humanity is going to be. And it's going to be a culture where people feel like they are playing, that their opinions, it's not that they feel that their opinions are important. Their opinions are important, even when you're wrong. I'm somebody who's been wrong a lot of times, but the more when you're wrong and you see something that's true and correct, it really deepens your understanding. So we want to model something different in this movement, because there's one other question I want to answer that's in the chat. What comes after the regime is driven out? Well, there's a lot of possibilities there, and that too is something that should be discussed and talked about. Not instead of building the movement, but in the course of building the movement. That should be the great fun and joy of a movement like this. You're out all day, you're organizing protests, you're talking to people, and then at night you're going out and or going for a cup of coffee, going for dinner, cooking dinner, in whatever form, and you're talking about what could really be. How could we actually live like human beings? I have, as a follower of Bob Avakian, a very clear understanding of what the potential of humanity is and how we could have a radically different society. But other people have different ideas. So let's talk about that. But in order to get to any better future, we have to stop this fascism and drive this regime out. So very simply, we have a really big 2 weeks here to put these demands in front of millions, and we have 2 weeks in which we're going to grow this organization, and it needs to be geometric, not just adding a few people here and there, but putting our arms around a whole lot of people, being able to be okay with a lot of different ideas contending. But if you zero in on the slogans, that can forge the broad unity that will go in the right direction.
All right, so Andy was talking about the next few weeks, the next period, and what we need to be putting ourselves to. But we want to pull out what he said about, as a follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, he has a really deep scientific understanding of the different kind of way we could be living with a revolution, the different future that's possible. And it is true what Andy said. Everybody in Refuse Fascism from different perspectives and in the broader movement to stand up against and drive this fascist regime from power needs to be bringing in their views, their ideas, their dreams and visions of the future, and we need to be getting into them together. But we want to go deeper here into what Bob Avakian has forged in terms of what's possible through a revolution on a scientific foundation. And Bob Avakian, as Andy said earlier, is the architect of a whole new framework of human emancipation. He is the author of the new communism. And earlier this year, I did 2 major interviews with him. And the second interview really digs into what is new about this new communism. Why does it matter so much? We want to play a portion of that for you now. I ask him about internationalism, and he speaks to actually much more than that. Let's watch. Let's talk about the international picture a little bit with the new socialist republic. You've made the point about internationalism. The whole world comes first. It's in your book, Basics, from your talks and writings, quotations and essays. How does that apply in a new socialist republic?
Look, there are a number of contradictions that the new communism is setting out to deal with in a way that's beyond the way these contradictions have been dealt with in past communist revolutions and socialist societies. And, I think this is very important to understand. One of these contradictions I referred to, which is, how do you advance toward communism on the basis of the masses of people moving to do that through all the different contradictions and ebbs and flows of the process without, as I put it, metaphorically, putting guns at the backs of the mass of people and, in any case, force marching them to communism, which you cannot do and will not work and will actually lead to a revolt against you and will actually lead back to capitalism or feed the forces seeking to go back to capitalism. So that's one contradiction that the new communism is consciously setting out to deal with, or that I've set out to deal with in the new communism, which is actually leading masses of people through all the contradictions and difficulties to advance on the road to uprooting and overcoming all these exploitative and oppressive relations and advancing to communism without, force marching to people to do it. Or another way to put it is, how do you do that without turning out the lights intellectually and culturally? And that relates to another very profound contradiction of transforming the world in the direction of communism and transforming particular countries on the road to communism as part of an overall international or world process. And that is, how do you orient your society to actually, including the economy in particular as the foundation of everything, how do you orient it toward meeting the fundamental needs of the masses of people, in particular their basic material needs on an expanding basis, as well as their intellectual and cultural needs, without, once again, turning out the lights, without, not providing for or even suppressing intellectual and cultural ferment, dissent, and so on. This is another contradiction that the new communism is dealing with in a completely different way, on a completely different level than it's been dealt with in the past. Now, another dimension, to get back directly to your question, is the international dimension. How do you handle the contradiction between the things I've been talking about, meeting the needs of the people, transforming the particular country on the road of socialism toward the final goal of communism in the world, with everything that's involved in that I've been just touching on, while at the same time being oriented fundamentally toward advancing the struggle of people worldwide toward the same goal. And that can be a very acute contradiction, both materially in terms of look, there you have, at any given time, you only have so many resources. And you're having a struggle about how you're going to utilize those resources in an exploitive way or in a way that does away with exploitation. How are you going to utilize those resources in a way that's liberating, at the same time meeting the needs of the people and within the country, and materially as well as politically supporting revolutionary struggles around the world? That's another acute contradiction. And then it can become even more acute if these, imperialist countries around the world, as they will move in various ways to try to suffocate, strangle, and actually attack and overthrow your new socialist system. And so therefore you have to provide for the defense of your new socialist system against forces not only within the country, but surrounding the country at any given time, who want to defeat and destroy what you're working to build. So how do you handle the contradiction between that and actually supporting revolution in the world materially, as well as, in terms of, culturally, politically, and so on? So, all these are dealt with in a different way by the new communism. Not saying, oh, well, let's just do everything for the world revolution, and we don't, so what if people can't go hungry here in this country, or they have no shoes for their children? No, you have to pay attention to those needs as a very basic question, but you have to figure out how to handle the contradiction so at the same time you're increasingly able to give material as well as political support to the revolution in the world as a whole, because you recognize that ultimately, not in any, immediate terms, but ultimately, you have to advance to communism on a world level. And, you cannot just be an island of socialism within a sea of capitalism, imperialism over any long-term, period of time. So even on those terms, as well as the fact that, as you referred to, humanity comes first. That's our basic orientation. There's nothing special or specially good or God-favored or whatever by the people in this country or any other. We're all human beings, and that's the most fundamental identity we have. With all the other things that are very real in terms of oppressive relations, the most fundamental identity we have is as human beings, and we share a common fate as human beings, one way or another. I mean, one of the things that's interesting, even under the auspices of this system, you'll see astronauts and others who go into space and they look at the Earth from the space. And, I've read recently, one of them said the idea of the different countries and, and borders, which are he didn't go this far, but the idea of different countries seems ridiculous when you look at the Earth from space and see it as one thing, And the idea that you have all these barriers and borders and armies, and to enforce all these divisions, and you have people who are declared illegal if they go from one country, one part of that world to another. You step back and you can get the same view as those astronauts and people in space get. This is all one world and one humanity. And even though we have to proceed through different countries and different societies on the road to achieving communism on a world level, to keep in mind that fundamental picture of, the unity of humanity ultimately. And, you can see the unity concretely expressed. People do, come from different parts of the world to other parts of the world all the time. They're always bragging, the ruling class in the country, this is a country of immigrants. Now we got a fascist regime that says we got to get rid of all these so-called illegal immigrants. And, and of course they're going to sweep up, if they have their way, they'll sweep up a lot of legal ones too, even according to the restricted notions of the law. So, this is a fundamental point of orientation of, we are going for the emancipation of humanity as a whole, because that's the way that everyone can get emancipated and no other way ultimately. And because we all share that fundamental identity, if you will, or that fundamental reality of being human beings on one planet.
So that was an incredible segment from the interviews that you did recently with Bob Avakian. You should watch those in full on this channel or on Bob Avakian's social media platform. That was from part 2. And part 1 is dealing more with fascism and what actually is capitalism and what do we do now. It really would change things if this is what people were hearing and debating and engaging. And, I just have to say, so I was at this event this weekend.
Okay, the truth is, Annie was ranting to me after this event and then to others. So we were like, why don't you say this on the show? Because this kind of thing happens all the time. Go ahead.
So I was at an event this weekend that was on the future of revolution, the future.
that doesn't happen all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
The future of revolution, the future of communism. But the kind of thing I'm about to say happens all the time, and we actually have to fight this out. So the person was giving a presentation, and their vision of what's needed for the future of communism is to build up workers' councils. That's what they were arguing is the answer. And I talked to them afterwards and asked them. I actually spoke from the floor, but then afterwards we were talking, and I'd asked, so have you ever read Bob Avakian's work? He said, oh, well, I've read a few essays. And I just, so people may not know this, but in addition to what we just heard in the development of the whole new communism, Bob Avakian has actually spoken very specifically in a number of places to what's wrong with the idea of and the identification of socialism with workers' councils one-to-one. He's written an article specifically titled "Workers' Democratic Control: A Damaging Delusion. Impossible under capitalism, destructive under socialism." And the subhead, I think, is particularly important. He says, we need a revolutionary transformation of society and the world, not a bourgeois democratic continuation or restoration of capitalism. And people can go read this on revcom.us. It's a very substantive article. But you just have to say, for somebody who says their work is and put themselves to try to figure out, okay, here's what communism ought to be. And here's this leading theoretician who's actually answered this, and you've not seriously engaged it, then you're not serious or you don't want to be challenged, both of which are not okay, especially when these are the questions of such urgent historic import about whether we're actually going to get free. What's involved in ending oppression and exploitation? How do you do that without turning into the people you just overthrew? That's what we just heard from Bob Avakian with such beautiful inspiration, and that courses through his work, and you haven't seriously looked into this. This is what has to change, and we have to go fight with people to raise their sights and to actually, including take your own work more seriously. Hear an argument about it.
I think that's important. It's not you have to agree with all this, but if you're seriously thinking this is the way, and there's somebody who has put forward a very substantive argument for something else, you should want to know. And in an all-around way, BA has done this work for 60 years, working on the problems of how humanity can get free, how we can get out of what he has called the long, dark night of human beings being divided into masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited, oppressors and oppressed, and we're one system and one society after another, wars and all this horror, and now we're on the brink of it could be game over with the climate, with the fascism rising in this country, with the danger of nuclear war, and somebody has said there's a way out of this. You should find out. You should find out.
What he adds when he talks about that long, dark night is shrouded in ignorance and misery. And we no longer have to be shrouded in ignorance and misery. So that's the challenge. Get into Bob Avakian's work. Get into the new communism. Let's debate it.
Yeah. So with that, we have one last thing we want to deal with in today's episode. And it is the absolute, just a horror show that is a worsening horror each week in Gaza, the starvation of a whole people on top of the bombing and destruction, on top of even greater horror being promised right now. So we're going to touch on that.
אתמול בלילה ישבנו עד שעה מאוחרת בקבינט והחלטנו על פעולה עצימה בעזה. אנחנו תהיה הנאה של האוכלוסייה כדי להגן עליה.
סוף סוף מפסיקים לפחד מהמילה כיבוש. אנחנו כובשים את רצועת עזה, מטהרים אותה, שולטים בכל השטחים שאנחנו נכנסים אליה.
فوسعوا العملية. طبعا الناس خايفة، الأطفال خايفة، الشباب خايف، العالم كله هيات، وفي قطاع غزة كله متخوف. جوا من دمار، من نزوح، من مكان لمكان، كل يوم في مكان، كل يوم. بدنا هدنة طويلة الأمد نرتاح منها ويرتاح الشعب كله.
احنا زهقنا من الحساب والعذاب تاع اليهود ودمرونا وشردونا وقتلونا. احنا بدنا امان وسلام في هذه الدنيا، مش بدنا نضلنا مطفشين وشاردين، جوعانين وعطشانين، مش لاقين حاجه هالحين، والله طحين ما هو موجود.
What we heard from the Israelis is that they will militarize, manipulate, politicize the aid by allowing only aid to a few concentration hubs in the south, a scheme where people would be screened, where it's a completely inoperable system that would force people to move to get aid, and it would continue starvation of the civilian population.
What's imperative now is an end to the violence, not more civilian deaths and destruction. Gaza is and must remain an integral part of a future Palestinian state.
The continuation of the war will not bring the hostages back.
As you saw from that video, the situation in Gaza is escalating. The bombs have not stopped dropping. They've killed 58 people here, 30 people there. It's incessant, and the starvation is increasing. According to Al Jazeera, over 290,000 children are on the brink of death amid this blockade. It's a horror, and it's being driven because of U.S. imperialism, because this country sees Israel and treats Israel as a military outpost in a strategic region of the Middle East. This is maddening. It is, as Bob Avakian has said, an insane and absurd system, a monstrous system. At the same time, we've been heartened as we're here today that there's also been ongoing resistance. And just today, over 100 students took over the library amidst just vicious and very serious repression.
Yeah. This is a lot of courage.
Yeah, it's a lot of courage. Over 25 students are now on day 3 of a hunger strike at colleges, at state universities across California.
This is day 2 of the hunger strike.
The Israeli government has announced its plan to occupy Gaza and forcibly expel 2 million Palestinians from their homes. This comes after a complete blockade of food, water, and electricity for the past 3 months.
We demand that our university's presidents implement the same human rights screenings passed here at SFSU.
Right now, everyone in this country has a responsibility to stand up and demand that this genocide end. And everybody, whatever you think of what's happening in Palestine and Gaza, has a responsibility to defend and have the backs of the protesters who are demanding that this genocide stop and raise the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Stay tuned on revcom.us for more coverage of this. Write in with your questions and thoughts.
Be in the streets and be working to build the protest. May 17th to raise the demand. The Trump fascist regime must go now. And on May 15th at the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. and around the country to protest against the assault on birthright citizenship and the rule of law more broadly as part of this fascist regime.
If you're not following Bob Avakian on social media, follow at Bob Avakian Official. Follow this channel, put a comment and question in the section below, and become a Patreon of this show at patreon.com/the Revcoms. We are only able to put on this show because of your generous contributions. So ask others, spread the word, donate. And we want to thank the crew of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
And we want to send you out with a song from a young boy in Gaza who was recently killed, who was becoming increasingly known as the voice of Gaza, singing songs beautifully, incredible voice, a lot of joy in the face of horror with his father. He sang, and it was becoming known around the world on the internet.
Yeah, Hassan Ayad was just recently killed in a bombing in Gaza, so we want to take you out with his beautiful voice.
يلي ما شاف الغربان غزة موت أعمى بعيون أمريكيين بالطيارات إحنا دقنا طعم الموت غارة برية وبحرية سدوا المعاد